So I want to talk about God within. You know, the real God is within you. As Myrtle Fillmore said, sometimes we want to pray to a God that's outside of us, and that's fine, but the real transformation, the real healing power is within. So what is this inner being? What is this presence of pure being? Well, I've got a little visual aid here, a little cheesy visual aid, and this is the inside of you, the being. And so often we're living in the doing, which is on the outside of you. But we had a guy in the church I served once who was a medical student, and he had a neurosurgeon who was the toughest of all of their professors, who were also doctors. They were at the Stanford Medical Center. And he said that this guy said something that stunned him. There were 170 students in the room, and this doctor, neurosurgeon, professor, challenged them. He says, I want to challenge you to ask the question that every doctor needs to ask themselves. He said, when I was a young boy, my father had early onset Alzheimer's. He was a high school principal, but his last 10 years of life, he had Alzheimer's. In his last 7 years of life, he never once spoke. And it got to the point where there was just no cognitive awareness at all. My mother took care of him with a devotion that he called biblical, and gave so much love and just gave so much care, and his brother, who was 17 and he was 15, kept trying to get her to leave town and go to a spa or do something for herself, which she wouldn't do. Finally, the weekend came when she agreed to do this and let the 15-year-old and the 17-year-old take care of their mother. And that was the weekend, of course, that she chose to leave the planet, that he chose to leave the planet. What happened was this. He was sitting there in his chair, the father, and all of a sudden he fell out of the chair onto the floor, and they reached for the phone to call 911 and heard a voice that they hadn't heard in 7 years coming from their father saying, "Don't call 911, son. Tell your mother I'm fine and that I love her." And then he died. He said, I challenge you, medical students, who does the speaking when there's no brain, when the brain is gone? Who is this? This is the presence of pure being. Many of us, ask yourself, when have you seen the transparency of a soul and seen inside the soul? Is it in the birth of a baby? How about when somebody has passed on and passed over? Have you ever gone through that experience of nursing a person through the hospice experience? When I was working as a volunteer in the hospice center, they become transparent. And yes, they all have different ways of expressing that, but sometimes you can see that soul essence inside of them. When my dad, in 1978, made his transition, my dad had his ups and downs, and sometimes we had a better or worse relationship. But in those last few days, there was somebody there that had always been there, but I hadn't perhaps looked far enough to find. It doesn't necessarily require a tragedy, a Katrina. People treat each other better for the most part when they go through a disaster or a catastrophe. But this goodness, this basic good soul, your good heart dwells inside of you and is always beating and is always expressing. But how do you get in touch with it? How do you get in touch with that inner voice, that inner self, that part of you that is humble and kind, that extends yourself to other people, that is willing to not get revenge? Well, there's really two ways. One is love and the other is prayer. Now, one of my kids was sharing with me a few months ago a very unjust situation, and they had a perfect solution to their problem. They thought that, they had a way that they could kind of get back at this person, and they had the perfect way of doing it. They could get away with it and everything. And I said, if you were less conscious, maybe you wouldn't understand this, but you know better. That's a whole boat of karma you're buying there. There certainly is a time to stand up for yourself, but you never stand up against anybody else. You never take retaliation. You never take revenge, because what it does is it creates a rebound in your life. Revenge, retaliation, and rebound. And so I said, to those who have been given much, much is expected, and you are a highly evolved soul, and you have this understanding. And they went, yeah, I know. But boy, I sure would like to do that. I said, I know, but you can't. You can't. Because there's the presence of pure being. And you say to yourself, but what good is that when the person's not behaving right? Because they have that presence of good being, pure being in themselves as well. And this was a disturbing story I've shared before. I shared it at 9, but I'm going to share it again. So please buckle up. I had a classmate of mine in ministerial school who was a yoga teacher before he was a ministerial student. And he was a yoga teacher on death row as a volunteer at San Quentin prison. And in San Quentin, a strange kind of architecture on death row where the different inmates could not see each other, but they could only see in the middle courtyard section. And he would be there and he'd lead them through the yoga asanas. And it was a wonderful experience. He's a very good yoga teacher because I took classes from him. And he really would help you move into a whole wonderful transcendent state. The problem was there was one guy on death row. His name was Charles Manson. And he was not buying any of it. In fact, he decided he was going to give them a hard time every time he tried to teach them the yoga. And he would call out and catcall and heckle them. But he would do it as if he was a fundamentalist Christian, which is an interesting thing, and tell them they're all going to hell because we're practicing yoga and that Jesus was going to come get them and all this terrible stuff. And my friend asked in his heart, what do I do? What do I do with this guy? It's kind of this is the ultimate, isn't it? And what came to him was to go up to him and say, you're always talking about Jesus. Charlie, do you want me to get you a picture of Jesus? And he said, yeah. So he went and he got him a picture of Jesus. And he brought it to him and he took it and he looked at it and he says, it's plastic. I'll take it back if you want. Nope, it's mine. And then he looks at it and he points at my friend and he says, he's you. And my friend looked at him and says, he's you too. He says, I already knew that. He never heckled them again. Now you say, what good is that? This man has done terrible things. But this is challenging. I'm challenging your soul here. In the overall long-term scheme of things, every soul comes to consciousness. Every soul has that possibility. And I know that's not acceptable to everyone, but I truly believe this. I know it in my heart of hearts. I see the evidence of it everywhere I go. I see it in my own life. My own unconsciousness becomes conscious. Carl Jung said you never will achieve enlightenment by lighting a candle or visualizing light, but letting the darkness become conscious. And becoming conscious is what we're about as souls. And that part of yourself, I know it's challenging to you, but in the long term, and it's true for everyone, you are in the presence of pure being. I am now in the presence of pure being. Together? I am now in the presence of pure being. But there are two ways of accessing that pure being. The one is to love each other, to reach out and to be kind and in humility. Express that love when it's difficult to express, especially. That's when it is most valuable. That's when you lay up the treasures in the kingdom of heaven consciousness. The other is to pray. And prayer takes two elements, two sides. There's many different ways to pray. Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, had many different ways to pray. James Dillard Freeman, Unity's poet laureate, who wrote Let There Be Peace on Earth and the Prayer for Protection. We were having lunch one day and he told me two things about Charles Fillmore and prayer. He said, I noticed over the years I was able to catalog 4 separate and sometimes contradictory ways that Charles Fillmore accessed the divine. And they were very different from each other. So there's not just one way to do it. And I shared with him, it's kind of like operating systems. My son, when he was in middle school, had a Chromebook, so he used the Google operating system, and now he's in high school, and they're using iPads. They use the Apple operating system. He comes home, he uses our desktop, and it uses the Windows operating system, but it all gets the job done. The question is, how are you accessing that divine? Doing it in your own way. But you got to do it. You got to find out a way to do it. And prayer is that yearning of your heart, of your soul for connection, for connectedness from where you came from and where you're headed. Where you came from is the essence of pure being, and where you're headed is the oneness. And in this central part of you, you're one with everyone else. Out here, well, there's Megan, and there's me, and there's Lynn, and there's Betsy, and there's Sam. And we all have different expressions because we're individuated expressions of the one. Out here in the rim, we call this what? We call this the personality self, the ego, the lower self. But it's still an expression of God that should be honored. But on the inside, what do we call that? Well, we call that, I behold the Christ in you, right? But you know, up here on Elmhurst, I drive by a little Buddhist temple. How many people have seen a little Buddhist temple on Elmhurst? It's real sweet. It's got great energy. And so I went online, and because religion is my business, I went online and I checked and found out, what do they believe? Who are these Buddhists? Buddhism is as diverse as Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, or any other religion. So I found out, and they're very mystical. This little group, they're worldwide, but I read the things that their founder wrote. And if you just substituted the word Christ within for Buddha nature, it was exactly the teachings that we teach. Because that inner core, that mystical core, is there in every world religion. Here, in the presence of pure being, we're all one. Religions, people, races, individuals, we're all one. We have outer expressions, but within we're all one. They once said, you know, every mystic must come from the same country, because all the mystics of all the world religions speak the same language, and they do. They have more in common with each other than with the fundamentalists out here in the core. But how do you get in touch with this inner voice? Shel Silverstein, the great mystic. Shel Silverstein wrote a wonderful poem about this. He says, there's a voice inside of you that whispers all day long. I know that this is right for me. I feel that this is wrong. No teacher, preacher, parent, friend, or wise man can disguise what's right for you. Just listen to the voice that speaks inside. And this is the voice. It's within you. But you know, the question is, and I've shared this before, you go down to the mall, you see a map, and it tells you where all the stores are. But what's the first thing you look for? The little arrow that says what? You are here. So the question is, where are you here? Are you here? Are you here? And how do you move into that presence of pure being? Well, you do so by recognizing, first of all, that it exists. By saying to yourself and realizing to yourself, I am basically good. I don't care what I was taught as a child in some religious upbringing. I don't care what my parents may have misdemonstrated to me. I know that in the presence of pure being, I am basically a good person. And everybody else has that essence as well. And although there's a time that you have to set boundaries, and I said to my child, sometimes you have to take drastic action, sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, sometimes you have to take a stand, but never in retaliation or revenge, always to stand up for yourself. Once I was in a situation where a person was in a power position, they were abusing the power and abusing me, and I decided, I prayed, show me how to stand up to this person, and what came to me is never stand up to this person, stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself. Make it a yes, never a retaliation, never a revenge that brings a rebound. But how do you get in touch with this? You look deeper than the surface. You realize that the presence of pure being is the Christ in you and in everybody else. But what is that Christ in you? When I say, I behold the Christ in you, what I'm really saying is, I'm beholding the presence of pure being. I'm seeing there's something in you that is more than and beyond what's apparent. It's that essence that's within us. But you know, we've got to get in touch with that essence within us. And it's springing forth all the time. You know, when Lynn and I lived in Florida, we would go to these freshwater springs, and the manatees would play. And the manatees would always seek out the source of the water. They would always seek out the place that originated the flow. Smart manatees that they were. Well, we need to get in touch with the source of that presence of pure being. In our beings, the energy flows from within out. But so many of us try to get to the doing of us, the outer of us, that doingness, and try to get experience of being by doing. That's workaholism, that's alcoholism, that's addiction. But instead of getting in touch with the presence of pure being and finding out that there is a Christ within us and in each other. I have an exercise for you to do if you're interested in it. It's outside of Fellowship Hall on these little sheets of paper. And it's the hymn that we sing when we take in new members, I behold the Christ in you. But what does that mean? That means seeing that there is a divinity within everyone else. And I'm sharing this from 36 years ago. When I went through my divorce, you know, I had all my feelings, I had all my stuff, and things were really rugged and things were really rocky. And I can say this with the permission of my ex-wife who watches our videos. So hello. 36 years ago, the turning point was when I took this hymn, and I don't know if somebody told me about it or I just thought it up, and I wrote it out. But every time it says you put the name of the person. You think, that's so simple, but it shifts you. It shifts you. Get this little sheet of paper, write out. You think, oh, how's that going to do anything? But it will. It does. Now you say, now one of the things I always have to say when I tell people to do this kind of exercise is, you aren't necessarily going to get the result that you have in mind. That you can't force anything on anyone else. It takes more than one person to decide to change things. So this person may never be a person you even choose to have a cup of coffee with. In fact, you may even take out a court injunction on them, but you don't do it out of retaliation. I'm trying to say this so that you understand it's not being a doormat. It's coming from the best, the highest, and when you do this, you're acknowledging that presence, that power, that presence of pure being that's within every person. That light of God that was within each one of us. But you know, that light of God is within each one of us because God is the presence and the power within us. But what God is that? You know, a lot of us, you ever heard of spiritual ego? You ever heard of a person who gets a little bit of enlightenment or a little bit of understanding and then they kind of spin out in their egos on it? Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist and mystic, he actually was a student of New Thought, but he didn't talk about it too much. He talked about it. He said, there are two ways of thinking I am God. Now, if you think I here in my physical presence and in my temporal character am God, then you are mad and you have short-circuited the whole experience. You are God, but not in your ego, in your deepest being. In your deepest being. So you got to seek and find that deepest being. Emily Cady, Unity's great writer who wrote Lessons in Truth, said there is only one sin. There is only one sin. Would you like to know what that sin is? Thinking you're separate from God. Ultimately, she says that's the source of everything. So then how do you connect? Through loving, especially when it's difficult, and through prayer. And what are the forms of prayer? Well, as I was sharing, Charles Fillmore had many forms of prayer that he used, and one of them was affirmative prayer. James Ella Freeman said that Fillmore had 4 different ways that he could count. He didn't say what they were, but he also said something else. He said, there's a difference between how I access God and how Charles Fillmore did. Charles Fillmore said the highest form of access where the healings would take place at Silent Unity was his silent times. He would move into silence. And that is a powerful experience. That's that breathing in experience. But he said, for me, it is speaking words, affirmations out loud. He says, I'm a writer. And when I've done that, there have been so many miraculous experiences that have happened in people's lives. But it takes both breathing in and breathing out. And you've got to be fluid and flexible, but also find out the way that's best for you. I'd like to ask you, what's more important, breathing in or breathing out? And I want to ask you to try it out. So everybody breathe in, and then breathe out. Now I want you to vote. Who says that breathing in is more important? Who says breathing out is more important? Yeah, a few people. Well, try that one out. You got to do both. Now prayer is breathing out. It's the expression. It's the outer acknowledgement of that presence and power. But meditation is breathing in. And you say, well, I don't meditate. I don't know how to meditate. But what could you do? What will you do? What can you do? What are the different presences and powers that you can express within your own soul's experience? Well, how about getting a hammock? How many people have a chair or a hammock or a favorite place on your porch outside that you sit? Raise your hand. If you don't have one, well, maybe you live in an apartment with no balcony and that's just the way it is. But there are ways to access the divine that go beyond just religious experience. Get in touch with the wholeness of your being through letting in nature. This is the breathing in. The breathing in. Letting that energy come in. And then the breathing out. Well, there's traditional prayer. We do that every Sunday at 10:20. We have the silent reverent prayer circle, and we've got 25 people speaking the words, the names of their loved ones. And we experience a sacred energy. It's so powerful. Lynn and I pray every night together for people and speak their names aloud, letting that kindness of our heart express in that powerful outer way. These are all different ways of doing it. But you've got to express outwardly that inner yearning of your soul. Your soul wants to grow. Your soul wants to come into its full expression of being, but you have to call it forth. And sometimes the best way is to say to your heart of hearts, I call forth my heart of hearts. Together? I call forth my heart of hearts. Call it forth into visibility. Myrtle Fillmore, Charles Fillmore's wife, was the first one to have a healing. She had 2 terminal diseases. She'd learned about affirmative prayer, which she'd never heard of before, being raised a good Methodist. And suddenly she went to this lecture and learned about speaking prayers, affirmative prayers. And she had 2 healings of these terminal diseases. But she talks about this. She said, the light of God was revealed to us. The thought came to me first, that life is of God, that we are inseparably one with this source, and we inherit from the divine and perfect Father. What that revelation did for me at first was not apparent to my senses, but it held my mind up above negation, and then I began to claim my birthright and act as if I believed myself to be a child of God, filled with God's life. I gained. Other people saw there was something new in me. They asked me to share it. I did. Others were healed, and they began to study. My husband just continued his business and at first took little interest in what I was doing, but after a time, he became absorbed in the study of truth as well. So he got in touch with this as well. He moved from the outer ego to the inner soul. He moved from the outer doing into the inner being. And he expressed at one time, he said, the ego is a terrific servant but a terrible master. Moving from that ego to the soul through prayer is a powerful thing for us to do. But it means recognizing that there is something inside of us that is worth connecting with. It's worth it to get in touch with this inner self, this inner guidance that comes from each one of us. And that is the God in you. But that God in you is not separate from you. We always think of God as way out here, but Jesus himself got in trouble with the religious authorities of his day when he tried to tell them that God was inside of them. And imagine what would happen if he walked into one of his churches today and tried to pull this one off. He said, I and my Father are one. And the people took up stones to stone him. And he answered them, I have showed you a lot of good works from my Father. For which one of these good works are you throwing rocks at me? And they answered him, saying, we're not throwing rocks at you because of good works, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, make yourself God. He said, well, isn't it written in your own law that you are gods? And if God called you gods, then why are you saying to me that I'm blaspheming because I'm saying I'm the Son of God? This is something that's not popular to be read in churches too much, but what is that God essence in you but the presence of pure being that's within your soul? But you've got to cultivate it. You've got to call it forth. You do that through loving and expressing, and you also do it through prayer. It's worth every effort. And I just want to invite you to take this moment to not only connect through prayer, but to reach out to the people in your world, in your life, in this time of prayer. And so we'll just take that affirmation, that silent affirmation, I am now in the presence of pure being. I am now in the presence of pure being. Silently affirm this to yourself. I am now in the presence of pure being. And remember that in your heart of hearts there is something that is good. There's kindness. There's humility. In your heart of hearts there's the willingness to reach out and touch the person in your life, whether that person is challenging or easy to love. Acknowledge, cultivate, nurture this presence of pure being within your being. Before we can behold the Christ in each other, we can behold the Christ in ourselves. I know, I feel, and I affirm that I am basically good in my soul. And I express this goodness to everyone in my life. And now take a moment to extend this goodness in your heart to another person, perhaps a challenging person, or perhaps somebody that needs your prayer thought. Take this moment now. I am now in the presence of pure being. These are more than words. This is the essence of who we are. This is the wellspring of fresh water from within our soul. This is the center of us. And we know where our value comes from, flowing from within out. Thank you, God. And so it is. And as always, we take a deep breath and we move inward and we breathe out. And we imagine that our in-breath represents listening to God and our out-breath is talking to God, and we need both. And we set aside all papers in our hands and quiet our hands and open them up. Because in this quiet space, we can become aware to the feeling of the openness in our hands, that there is a presence and a power within us. And we know with each in-breath, we're breathing in God. And every time we exhale, we are expressing our love to God. So take another deep breath and let it out. And become aware that there is only one presence and one power. And it's deep within my heart. And that the goodness of God is my true nature. And as I become aware that I am basically good in my heart of hearts, I feel the tingling of the energy in my open hands. And I move deeper into my open heart. And as we gather this energy together, we move into this awareness. We allow ourselves to be drawn into our hearts. That place within us where the presence of God dwells. So feel yourself being moved into your heart. Become aware of your heart. And know that in your heart is the presence of pure being, the presence of God. Whatever your need is, whatever the desire of your heart is, let it rest there gently in your heart. And we get in touch with the love that we feel for all of our loved ones, for all the people who have served our country, for all the people in our lives, and even the people who are difficult to love. We know that this is the most direct way to move into our heart space, to move into our hearts, to take those people who are difficult to love. We just say in some way, I want to love this person. I don't know how, but I want to love this person. And then move into your heart and know that your heart knows. My heart already knows how to love. And where there is a need in your life, just say, I already know because my heart knows. My heart already knows what is needed here. And where there's a desire for a feeling of connectedness, of oneness, know that your good heart is capable of giving you that feeling. And so, oh God, let each one of us feel and know our good heart. The goodness, your presence in the center of our being. I want to know my heart. I want to know myself as good. I want to express the kindness and the humility and the goodness of heart in everything that I do. I want to reach out to all those in my life, even most challenging ones, because I have this good heart that wants to reach out. I am now in the presence of pure being. Feel this pure being as the love in your good heart. And take a moment to move deeply into it. I am now in the presence of pure being, and my beingness is my good heart. The Christ in me, the spiritual essence of me, I give voice. I call it forth. I call forth my good heart, and I say thank you. Thank you, God, for my good heart in all of its expressions. Thank you, God, and so it is. This morning our offering statement is, I give in the presence of pure being and I receive abundantly. Together. I give in the presence of pure being and I receive abundantly. And silently. And again aloud together. I give in the presence of pure being and I receive abundantly, and so it is.